Um, Welcome to the Bells July Member Masterclass. I'm thrilled that you are all here. You've been invited in with your cameras off and yourself muted, but please feel free to turn on your camera if you would like to be have your face showing for everyone to see. We'd love to see you, but also understand it's lunchtime and sometimes you want to eat your lunch without everyone watching. So we're going to get started in just a minute, but before we do, I'm going to do a quick little introduction. For those of you who don't know me, I am Nicole Loveld-Egar. I am the Bells Membership and Annual Giving Manager and facilitator for today's Member Masterclass. So we're really glad you're here. Just a heads up, this will be recorded. So if you miss any part of it, or if you have to duck in or out or want to share it with folks afterwards, we will be sharing out a link in the next newsletter, but also you can access this member masterclass and our former masterclasses. Oh, sorry, I'm just seeing, we're just getting some captioning pieces set out. So Jane, we're gonna get the captioning figured out. This will be on the member portal, but let's hold for a second while we get our captioner sorted out because that is much better than the live captions that we have access to. So everyone, please hold. Aha, I have figured it out. Okay. Thank you all for your patience again. So throughout this conversation, I'm going to be sharing links that Elaine mentions in the chat function. That's also a great way for you to pop in questions, comments, or if you have any needs, use the chat function at the bottom of the screen, or if you're on a tablet device, usually there's 3 little dots at the top corner you can click. We'll also be sharing out afterwards that this is the Bumble Bee Identification Week. Elaine will share a little bit about that, I think. And then if you haven't already, we have a wonderful exhibit in at the Bell Museum right now, Bugs Outside the Box, which is absolutely fantastic. It'll be here through the summer. That has larger than life insect replicas for you to explore. So once again, please use the chat, and we do have live transcript available. So if you would need to use that, that is available. There is a transcript button at the bottom. So without further ado, today we are joined by university educator and researcher Elaine Evans. We're going to learn a little bit about her work and research and about the Minnesota state bee, the rusty-patched bumblebee. So Elaine is a University of Minnesota extension educator and researcher working on pollinator education and research relating to bee conservation. She completed her Master's of Science and PhD in Entomology here at the University of Minnesota. She's authored several books, including Befriending Bumblebees, a guide to raising local bumblebees, and Managing Alternative Pollinators. Her work helps to monitor pollinators, improve the impact of our pollinator habitats, and raise awareness of the importance of pollinators to provide action steps for pollinator conservation. So without further ado, everyone, please give a warm welcome to Elaine.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to start sharing my screen here. Let's see. And I did it, right?
Yes.
All right. I always like to check. So yeah, I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about, so I'm going to start with some background on what I do in general and then get into bumblebees. We're going to end with some bumblebee ID and let's see, we won't call it a quiz, we'll call it a challenge at the end of things to have a few bumblebees for you to look at. In my position right now, I have 2 pieces to it. One is with the University of Minnesota Extension, and the other is with the University of Minnesota Department of Entomology. with my job with Extension, I do a lot of work on public participation in pollinator science, as well as with pollinator education. Currently, the program that we have going is the Minnesota Bumble Bee Atlas. And this is a project that's in cooperation with the Xerces Society. And we have volunteers going out all across the state collecting information on bumblebees. And this is expanding on a project we've had going on the last 5 years, the Minnesota Bee Atlas, which was looking not just at bumblebees, but at other bees too. And now we have this offshoot into the future focused just on bumblebees. If you end up getting really excited about bumblebees and want to know how to participate in the Atlas, we have the link there that you can find out more. We do still need more volunteers. One of the things we have for developed to help with pollinator education across Minnesota is a toolkit that has both physical and online pieces to help you teach others about the importance of pollinators. So also, if you just get really excited about pollinators and you decide that you want to talk to your friends, neighbors, different parts of your community and share information with them about pollinators and action steps, we have these physical kits, which there's some that are available for checkout through interlibrary loan and through some of the extension outreach centers, as well as a digital toolkit that there's a link for that you just need to go to that link and fill out a form, and you'll have access to presentations and trivia games and different ways to engage people with pollinator education. In my other part of my job as a researcher, which is very much connected to what I do as an extension educator, I have a few different areas that I'm focusing on: pollinator habitat, pollinator plantings, and a new study where we're going to be looking at the impact of viruses spreading from managed bees like honeybees. For pollinator plantings, we've been raising bumblebees, and then we we start them in little boxes. We move them out into fields next to these areas where we've planted with a few different seed mixes. So we're able to test out how these different seed mixes impact the bumblebee colonies for their health and their success. Another angle of that is a study we're doing, which is based in Washington County, where they've done a lot of mapping of where they have good pollinator habitat. And what we're doing there is doing surveys in random areas around near or far from those pollinator plantings. And we're looking at the bumblebee communities there to see how those bumblebee communities are impacted by kind of distance from those pollinator habitats. So sorry, this image is a little bit blurry, but the idea here, where we're doing a study on looking at viruses, is we know that bees will they visit shared flowers, so they'll go to the same flower, and when they're there, they end up leaving diseases there. So it's like like doorknobs where everybody's landing there, and then they fly off carrying diseases from each other. Because managed bees are kind of concentrated, there is more concern about what's happening from honeybees. So we're collecting bumblebees near and far from areas where there are honeybees, and then we're going to look and see what they have for viruses. We also will have detailed information on what's going on with the viruses in all of those honeybee colonies. So that's a brief overview of what I do in general, and I'm going to move into now talking about pollinators and about the rusty patch bumblebee. So, a lot of my work focuses on pollinator conservation. So what is the value of pollinators? Why should you be concerned about pollinator conservation? There's a couple pieces to this, a lot of different ways to look at it. So one is looking at the impact of the food on our plates. So bees and other animals that are pollinators are responsible for about 1 out of every 3 bites of food that you eat. And they're moving pollen around, and then those plants are able to produce fruits, seeds, a lot of our most nutrient dense foods that we get. But beyond that, they're pollinating around 80% of flowering plants overall. And then those flowering plants are connected to all these different animals, insects, amphibians, birds, mammals. And those plants also are really important for things like um, filtering water, building soil, really big picture ecological connections. So one of the perspectives for looking at pollinators and just natural resources in general, a lot of times we as people are, like, what do they do? What good are they? There's a lot of turning natural resources, the natural world around us, into capital. And historically, what happens in general is that capital is often used to put one species, one culture, one sex above all the others to gain more capital and control. A different perspective is to look at the natural world for all the interactions that are there and the working together that happens. And pollinators are an amazing example of different parts of the natural world working together. One of my favorite quotes around this is from Aldo Leopold: "To keep every cog and wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering." We do a lot of tinkering out in the natural world, and it's important that since we don't necessarily know what we're doing, we do what we can to preserve those pieces to keep things functioning. And pollinators are a key piece of what's happening out there in the world. For a lot of pollinators, we don't know a lot about how they're really doing. Honeybees, we're able to look at their colonies and kind of see how they're doing. For most other pollinators, we have 470 different kinds of bees in Minnesota alone. We are just kind of getting the list of who we have here right now. We don't even really know how they're doing. Bumblebees are an exception where we do have good information about how they're doing. And unfortunately, it's not too great. Some bumblebees species are doing okay. They seem to be doing fine, but it's about 1 out of every 3 bumblebee species in North America that are not doing well compared to how they used to be. So this is a list from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and so they found 1 out of every 3 species of bumblebees not doing very well. An example of that I'm going to focus on now is the rusty-patched bumblebee. So the rusty-patched bumblebee before the year 2000 was fairly common. They were pretty widespread across North America. Here in Minnesota, we found them pretty often. But then after that, around the year 2000 is when people started noticing that they weren't seeing them. This is a map of all of the places that they've been seen over the last 14 years. And there are also some numbers there from the US Fish and Wildlife Service. That's the total number that were seen by people that were reported to the Fish and Wildlife Service. So you can see, looking at where they were, there's lots of places, and it's not that people aren't looking. There's tons of bee research, for example, in Michigan. They've been looking and looking and looking, not a single rusty patch bumblebee in the state, as well as through most of the Northeast. There's a few that have been seen around Virginia, West Virginia, and then this whole clump in the Midwest, which we're lucky to be a part of. So Minnesota, we are still seeing them, not nearly as much as we used to. And there still are a lot of gaps, places where we suspect they are. We do still need more people looking, so that's part of why we're continuing to do this Minnesota Bumblebee Atlas, to try to keep looking and seeing where we are. With the Minnesota Bee Atlas project that we did the last 5 years, we did find a few new areas where they hadn't been seen previously, after the decline. So there's this huge decline. The rusty patch bumblebee is protected as an endangered species with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So it was in 2017 that they were listed. So 7 years after their decline. Looking at what was going on with them, it's a lot harder to figure out what caused that initial decline. There's a lot of different ideas, but one of the things we do have better information on are stressors. So things that are potentially keeping them from recovering. So there are a whole host of different things: habitat loss, pesticides, climate change, pathogens, and these things are all interacting with each other. So I'm not going to go into the details, but there's a lot of different things going on here. For some of the interactions, one of the interactions, for example, between habitat loss and pesticides. So habitat loss is losing, for example, flowers that provide the nutrition that bees need. When bees have a lot of good nutrition, even when they're exposed to kind of lower levels of pesticides, they can oftentimes do a better job of detoxifying from those pesticides when they have good nutrition. But when there's this combination of no flowers on the landscape and pesticide exposure, it becomes even worse. I'm going to focus on just a few of these stressors because these are the things that we can take action on more easily. So climate change, habitat loss, pesticides, and talking about managed bees. So habitat loss is in the middle here because it really does connect to a lot of these other things and is really important and is something we can all make a difference with. So the first piece of habitat loss is looking at nesting sites. So where do bumblebees make nests? A lot of species, actually even the endangered rusty patch bumblebee, they're pretty adaptable in terms of where they'll make nests. They'll use a lot of different kinds of habitat. The main thing they need is a cavity that has some kind of insulating material in it. So typically they'll be underground in an old mouse nest, and but they'll be in a mouse nest anywhere. So they'll be in a mouse nest if it's in someone's garage or if it's in a compost pile. They also will sometimes be above ground, just in clumps of grass and dried leaves, as long as it's kind of sheltered. So really the best way to make habitat for bumblebees to have places to nest is, I talk about in my yard, messy corners. So I have a bunch of places in my yard where I let leaves and sticks pile up. I have a lot of pollinator plantings and flowers in other parts of my yard, but I have some parts where I just leave things so that there's areas that can be potentially nesting habitat for these bees. So bumblebees are starting new nests every spring by solitary queens. They're the only ones who survive the winter. So yeah, just those. They can also use old bird nests. They seem to, in terms of where people live, they oftentimes will go into compost piles. So generally trying to have more undisturbed areas, places that they can go into and make their nests. So the second key piece for habitat is flowers. And rusty patch bumblebee will visit a wide range of flowers, and they need they're out and active from April through September. So they need something blooming that whole time. In April, you might look more, look up at the giant flowering plants we have in trees. So things like willows and maples are really good early pollen sources that are part of what we're talking about when we're talking about flowers. Some favorites for the rusty patch bumblebee are things from the mint family, the pea family, the aster family. It's nice if you can make a bigger clump of flowers. If you can have 6 or more plants that are together, that'll be more attractive to bring the bees in, make it easier for them to find those plants. And also, both for the nesting habitat and for the flowers, keeping pesticides off of those plants. There are lots of plants lists, and actually, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a great plant list for rusty patch bumblebee, which I did not share that link with you, Nicole, but I can send that to you to share afterwards. Another area where we can take action is with climate. So we need bees and bees need a stable climate. We need a stable climate too. Things we can do to help with this are to use clean energy sources, supporting environmental regulations. Um, a lot of people have heard about planting trees for climate, but grasslands and prairie plants actually do a great job of bringing carbon out of the atmosphere too. So a lot of them have these really deep root systems. The root systems can be 3 feet, 6 feet down into the ground. And those are helping also, besides trees, those are also bringing carbon out of the atmosphere. Sustainable agriculture is another great way that we can still produce food, but do it in a way where we are improving things for the climate and for our future selves. For pesticides, so pesticides, when we say pesticides, that means insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides. So insecticides, that's pretty clear. Bees are insects. So, and a lot of our other pollinators are insects, so they're going to be harmed by insecticides. Fungicides, we're learning more about those. We know they have big impacts on bees, where they impact their digestion and their food, where there's a lot of microbes that are involved in bees' diets. For herbicides, a lot of that impact is just in destroying flowers. So when herbicides are applied to flowering plants, and that is where the herbicides are mostly the impact. When buying plants for your garden, it's important to check to see if they've been previously exposed, because there are some of these systemic pesticides, which are commonly used, which will go up into the plant tissue. And we know that these pesticides will end up in the nectar and the pollen and flowers. Not all plant providers will know, but it is important to check and see and work with plant suppliers that can tell you what kind of insecticides, if any, are present for their plants. So I talked a little bit about this with the research project we have, about how diseases can spread from managed bees. And here I have pictures of honeybees, but also bumblebees. So there are managed bumblebees that are used mostly in greenhouses, but out in the field too. And it's the main things here are making sure that these managed bees are managed to reduce diseases, and also making sure that there's more than enough flowers to support them. A lot of people, when they hear about problems with bees, they think, oh, I'll help. I'll keep bees in my backyard. I'll keep honeybees. And to keep them healthy, I won't use any kind of treatments for them because it'll be better for them if it's natural. What happens then is those colonies tend to have more problems with disease and spread those diseases around. So for helping pollinators, really the best things you can do are making more habitats. So helping pollinators, the biggest steps are going to be getting more flowers in. And when we do have managed pollinators, to make sure that they're being managed properly to reduce diseases. So another piece for this, which also I talked about a little bit, is public science efforts. So having volunteers help come out and track bees. And this is important not just for bumblebees, but for all bees. So we do need help. This has really helped with the endangered rusty patch bumblebee. A lot of people are taking photos and sharing them. And from that, we're learning a lot more about where they are, which is really important for when we're working on recovery plans for protecting those populations and helping those populations recover with the goal of preventing extinction of this species. So with that, I'm going to give you some tools to be able to help um, participate in our documenting of pollinators. Before we move into that, I'm not sure if there's any questions that have come up into the chat about what I've talked about yet, or if anyone has any questions about that. I covered a lot of stuff.
We haven't had anything pop in yet, but yeah, folks, feel free to use the chat function to type in your questions as they come up. Oh, we have some right here. Perfect. Rick asks, he says, I have limited space for planting flowers. Try to provide some habitat in my yard by planting white clover in my lawn. Don't use broadcast herbicide because it kills the clover. I need to control weeds in order to avoid being a neighborhood nuisance. So I hear that. So to control dandelion and plantain weeds, I use a spot application of herbicide. Is that a reasonable strategy to help?
Yeah, so it is. So herbicides are interesting because they are an important tool for conservation for controlling unwanted species. So weeds in your lawn is an example. Another example where herbicides are used fairly frequently with restoring natural habitat when we need to control invasive plants. So a lot of times there's invasive thistles and things like that that if the other plants are going to have a chance to grow and establish, you do need to control those invasives. You know, I personally like dandelion and plantain. So I think some of what is happening kind of a step-by-step thing where I think culturally we can become more tolerant of what a lawn is and the different kinds of plants that can be in a lawn. At kind of a first step can be the white Dutch clover and controlling dandelions and plantain can help people get used to seeing something besides just turf grass. And then maybe little by little we can add more diversity in and have less need for controlling all those other plants.
Great. Then we have a question from Hillary, who is joining us from Northeast Minnesota in Cook County. Welcome. And Hillary is wondering if there are rusty patch bumblebees up in the northeastern Minnesota.
Yeah, so let me go back a little bit to the map of where they've been found so far. So there's a few sightings up north. So there's a few just kind of south of Duluth, and these are up by kind of Chippewa National Forest. But we still need more volunteers looking up here. We have had some volunteers looking there and haven't found any. So the kind of gray color on this map is where they historically were found. So they used to be there.
Mm.
And they may still be there and we just didn't find them yet.
Wonderful. So Hillary, you've been tasked with find all of our rusty patch bumblebees up north. Wonderful.
All right, so maybe we can segue into some bumblebee ID, so I can get you all ready to know what to look for out there. The rusty patch bumblebee, we're pretty lucky that it's pretty distinctive once you get used to looking looking at bumblebees. So the rusty patch bumblebee, they have this rusty patch, which isn't as obvious as the name as you might hope. It can be it kind of varies in color. Sometimes it's bright orange. Sometimes it's just kind of brown. But it's important to note where it is and kind of the colors around it. So bumblebees have 6 segments that go down their abdomen. The first 2 segments are the biggest segments, so they take up almost half of the bee just on those first 2 segments. And for the rusty patch bumblebee, their first segment of their abdomen is all yellow. The second segment is mostly yellow, but at the top edge of the segment in the middle, there's this rusty patch. And the other key thing to look for, if you see something that looks like a rusty patch on the abdomen of a bumblebee, and it has yellow kind of all around it, look for this black kind of T shape on the thorax. So they have black hairs going between their wings, and then there's a few black hairs coming back. So I've got a few pictures here following up.
And we do have a question for the diagram and then these photos that you're sharing with us. Elaine, are they queens, a female, male? Is there a difference?
There there is a difference. So the females, so workers are females. This is a worker. The male, the color pattern is the same for the males. For most bumblebees, the queen has the same color pattern. For the rusty patch bumblebee, it gets confusing, and the queen doesn't have a rusty patch, and and she doesn't have that black T shape on her thorax. So the queens, you'll only see them early in the spring, so April into May, and then you'll start seeing them at the end of their annual colony cycle. So usually not until August is when you'll start seeing queens coming out again. So for the sake of time, I didn't include all the queen identification information here, but I do have a link to a handout that has that information. And we also have a video on the Bee Lab YouTube channel that talks all about rusty patch bumblebee queen identification. So here you can see one of these workers that has a really dark, really rusty colored patch. Here are 2 bees. These were actually from the same colony. We had a nest that we found down in someone's house in Red Wing last year. We were able to go and make observations. And so you can see even in the same nest, there's variety, where this one has a really wide rusty patch, and this one has a really narrow one. But they both have the black between the wings, the black coming back in a little kind of thumbtack shape. And these are both workers as well. So other bees that you will see around and you might get confused with for the rusty patch bumblebee. One is the brown belted bumblebee. So one thing with the brown belted bumblebees, they do not have that kind of thumbtack shape. They do have some black hairs on their thorax, but it's just kind of a spot in the middle. On their abdomen, their first segment is all yellow, and then on the second segment, there's a swoop or a crescent shape. And as with the rusty patch, it can be variable, but that is where their brown color is. It can be kind of the same kind of rusty color as the rusty patch, but a key thing here is that on the other side of that brown will be black hairs. Remember, the rusty patch bumblebee has yellow on the other side of that patch, whereas the brown belted bumblebee will just be all brown. So here is a nice crescent shape with the brown hairs right up against the black for the brown belted bumblebee. So a lot of times bees like to hold their wings over their bodies where you are trying to see the colors, but you just have to kind of be patient and keep looking. If you're taking photos, make sure you get photos of their back. Hopefully you can get their wings moving out. One trick is to take videos and then capture stills, so you can get them from different angles, but still get to see what you need. This is a bumblebee that is actually really common up in Cook County and up and in the whole northern half of Minnesota. A lot of times I've had people go up north, come back and say, I saw so many rusty patch bumblebees. But when I see pictures, it usually ends up being the tricolored bumblebee. They're not very common in this part of the state. I'm in the Twin Cities, but once you get about halfway up, they become one of the most common bees. And these have bright orange. And this is very different than the rusty patch in that it's really obvious, really clear. They have this bright orange, and they have these distinct segments where they have the first segment is all yellow, the next two segments are all orange, and then there's yellow again, and it's going, most of the way down the abdomen. They also have this a black T shape on their thorax, so there's reason for people to get confused. But this is a lot more obvious. There's a lot more hairs, black hairs in the tricolored bumblebee pattern. And this is one again where the males and the queens are have the same coloration. And they're really a beautiful bee, really stunning colors. Another confusing one for the rusty patch bumblebee is the half black bumblebee. And this one has the first two segments of the abdomen are yellow, and then the rest are black. So, but remember, those first two segments are kind of bigger, so it ends up looking like it's about half of the abdomen that's black. And they just have the black dot of hairs. One of the reasons why these bees can be confusing is it kind of depends on the angle of the photo. So these, we can see clearly, these are all yellow hairs here, but even if you can see at the edge of this one, these hairs start looking darker. Those are all yellow hairs, but what's happening is the bee's exoskeleton, their cuticle, is all black. And depending on the angle you're looking, sometimes it can look like it's a little darker, like the hairs themselves are darker, but really you're just kind of seeing through the hairs. So these just get some different angles on the hairs on the abdomen, and you can see that they are all yellow, and they also will not have that T shape on their thorax. I'm also including a couple other bumblebee species that are not always commonly confused, but there are ones that you're likely to see, because these are a couple more of the most common bumblebees. And this one is so common, it even has common in its common name. So its common name is the common eastern bumblebee. For the common eastern, they have a little bit of this kind of a little bit of a thumbtack shape, but this is not so much hairs as their hairs just kind of thin out. and you can see this kind of teardrop shape on their thorax. But the main thing with these bees is the first segment of their abdomen is yellow, and the rest of their abdomen is black. And one thing to note is that bees do sometimes lose their hair. They're out there, digging into flowers and doing all kinds of things. And after a couple weeks, they can start to lose hair. The hairs don't grow back because they only live for a few weeks anyway. But just to be aware of looking at the patterns that you're looking at. If you're looking for color patterns, all of the color patterns I've been talking about are based on the hairs. So making sure that you're looking at the hair and not at the cuticle. So see here, you can see how dark their cuticle, their exoskeleton is. So that that first segment can have this kind of scalloped shape to it. So you can see that here where there's this kind of broad scallop shape that can happen with that color pattern for the common eastern bumblebee. There's just another pretty photo on a nice fall aster. And a lot of times you'll notice these big clumps on the legs of bees. That is pollen that the bees have been collecting, that they collect into pollen baskets on their hind legs. And you'll only see that on the females. So another bee that is commonly seen is the two-spotted bumblebee. And this one is named two-spotted because it has these two spots. So this one, like the common eastern, has the first segment all yellow. And then on that second segment, it's mostly black, except there'll be these two yellow spots, like a big yellow W in the middle. And here is a photo that's a little bit blurry, but you get the idea, where there's this whole big W shape in the middle of that second abdominal segment. And here's another one. This looks like a queen in the spring. So they have the same color pattern, and they have these nice big yellow W on their abdomen. So between the two-spotted bumblebee, the common eastern bumblebee, and the brown-belted bumblebee, those three species usually make up about 70%, 70 to 80% of the bees that you see out there. So they're really dominating what's out there. So here is another link for you guys. This is a handout that has all of the bees of Minnesota in there. So we are up to 24 different species now. I'm running out of room on the page for this document. There's one side is males and one side is females. So if we find any more bumblebee species, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. But to have a quick review of our lookalikes for the rusty patch and some of the common bumblebees, we've got the rusty patch bumblebee. Remember the thumbtack, the rusty patch surrounded by yellow. We've got this one, which you may remember is it has this brown belt. It's the brown belted bumblebee. This one with that stunning color pattern is the tri-colored bumblebee. Then we have this one with the first two segments all yellow, covering about half of the abdomen. That's the half black bumblebee. This one with just the first segment is the common eastern. And then this one with those two spots is the two-spotted. So now that you've had a chance to become familiar, we're going to have a little ID challenge here. And I'm going to show you a bee, and then I'm hoping you can use the chat to write in your answers. So here is our first bee. And maybe Nicole, maybe you can let me know what comes in.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the chat. All right. All right, we've got some answers coming in for two-spotted.
Yep, so this one has this nice W here. That is the two-spotted bumblebee. All right, how about this one?
While folks are answering for this second one, we did have a question come in. Are you likely to see several different species in the same yard?
Yeah, typically, especially if you keep looking for a while, in most places where we've done surveys, we'll find about 7 of the 24 species in any, like in a yard or in a park. If there's a lot of flowers, if there's a lot of diverse habitat around, we typically see more up to 11 or 14 different species of bumblebees.
Wow. All right, for this one, we have kind of a mixed bag. We have folks guessing half black and folks guessing common Eastern.
Yep. So this is the common Eastern. So it can be hard to count the segments, but this is the first segment is this kind of smaller one here. And then the second segment is this big one here. So if this were a half black, it would have yellow on both of these segments. But since this segment is all black, this is a common Eastern.
Wonderful.
All right, how about this? About this one.
All right, so as folks are putting their guesses in the chat for this one, we did have another question as well. What are these all the same size? Are they pretty close in size? Is there a pretty wide range?
There is there's a wide range in bumblebee size, both within species and between species. So there are some species that tend to be bigger. So on the guide that I had you share the link for, on that document, the images there are in relative size, relative kind of average size. So there are some that are generally bigger, some that are generally smaller, but within a bumblebee colony, how big a bumblebee is depends on how much pollen it ate when it was young. And so they don't grow anymore once they emerge as adults. They have the exoskeleton. That's kind of a hard stop on growing. And so even within one colony, even within one little batch of bees, there could be tiny bees and big bees.
Sure. I know I've seen them in my yard where it sounds like a drone coming by. It can be like the size of the end of your thumb. Okay. That was an aside.
One bee we didn't talk about is the queens are about the size of my thumb.
Oh, okay.
The queens are really big. The Oricomus, the black and gold bumblebees.
Wonderful. So folks are guessing rusty patch, and we have a guess for brown belted.
So this is a rusty patch bumblebee. So it does, if it was brown belted, it wouldn't have this yellow on the other side of the rusty patch. And you can also see some black hairs coming back from the kind of between the wing bases and coming back. The brown belted would just have black kind of right in the center. And so yeah, this is a rusty patch bumblebee that we found during surveys in the Twin Cities metro. So they are around. And I wanted to give you all a heads up now that you have some resources and some practice with Bumblebee ID. There's an event that's starting this weekend that's called the Backyard Bumblebee Count. And the idea with this is it's a bumblebee version of the Christmas bird count or the 4th of July monarch butterfly count, where we are having, trying to get as many people as we can out looking for bees when they're most abundant. So particularly for the rusty patch bumblebee, this kind of last week of July into August is when their colonies are typically at their biggest and you're most likely to find them. So it's a great time to go out and see if you can find them. But while you're doing that, we're interested in just any bumblebee that you see. And this is a project that's in iNaturalist, and there's a couple of ways to participate. There's more information about it on the Bee Lab website too. But this website that Nicole can share has all information there. You can participate as simply as if you have the app iNaturalist on your phone. You can just take pictures of bumblebees you see and upload them to iNaturalist. You could also do this on their website when you get back home. You can also, if you're interested, take the next step to do a mini survey. So pick a patch of flowers, try to get pictures of all of the bumblebees that you see on that patch of flowers, and keep track of how much time you're looking. So if you're looking at that patch of flowers for 10 minutes, keep track of all the bumblebees that you see, keep track of your time, and then you have options to enter that data so we can get kind of the extra level of information about what's going on with the bumblebees. So one thing so I mentioned, the angle, getting the different angles, just to mention kind of that angle on the top. This angle from the side is really good. It also can actually help to see just the front of the face of the bee. There's some bees that have long faces and some bees that have round faces. So those three angles are the most helpful, as well as just that helpful hint of if a lot of people are taking these on their phones. A lot of phones have great video cameras now, but any way you can take the photo with any kind of camera, and then share them on iNaturalist, and they'll automatically become part of the backyard bumblebee count. So to kind of draw back to kind of the big picture here, back out to pollinators, thinking about what their value is, and some of that value that they have is their role as connectors. And ways we can help them are making safe spaces for them, raising awareness about them, and gathering and sharing new information. And I think we have a lot to learn from what bees and other pollinators do as connectors. So there are these connectors between the insect and the plant world. There's all these connections between plants and people, and of people to each other. So I think there's a lot of value in just examining our connections and looking at ways that we can make a more equitable world on every level for people and for pollinators.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elaine. I just want to remind folks, if you have questions, pop them in the chat. I, for one, am so excited to go out my yard after we're done and just start poking around. And if you haven't used iNaturalist yet, it's a tool that we use with a lot of Bell programs, and it's a great way to get plugged into some of the citizen science that's happening here and in your neighborhood. And we have a question: if you could put up the slide that has the 6 types of bumblebees again, so we can take a look. And just as a reminder to folks, I will be sending out an email in the next day here with a quick survey just to get your feedback, but also with the links that Elaine has shared. And then in a few weeks, I'll pop the link. We have an online portal for members where you'll be able to access the recording to this, the member collection. So that was in the email that went out on Sunday. And then I'll include a link as well about where you'll be able to access that. You just need to enter in your email address or your membership number. or your name. You can really type in whatever. That's a little secret between you and I. Just enter in some sort of information and you'll be able to access this masterclass and our past masterclasses. But that is all that I have. Elaine, is there any last thing before we wrap it up today?
I don't think so. It's just kind of anecdotally, it seems to be a pretty good year for the Rusty Patch Bumblebee. There's a lot of spots around, at least around the metro, and I know in Wisconsin they're seeing a bunch. So it's kind of a hopeful year that your chances, I think, are getting better of finding them out there.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you all for being part of our membership and Bell community here today. And then, like I said, keep an eye on your email for follow-up information. And we hope that you'll be able to get out in the next week for the Bumblebee Count, and just to get connected with our little insect neighbors as well. So thank you so much, Elaine. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.